Thank you, councillors. So we'll put the recommendation up as tidied and see whether that hits the mark. I believe that Councillor Hamilton is moving and I'm seconding. So can you just talk us through any changes that have been made here, Andrew? So and the additional one at the bottom that you note. Anything we should be aware of?
There's no. Sorry, I was just waiting for the microphone to turn on. So in B it has some red text included to provide for the inclusions of the changes that we talked about today. Yeah. From a process perspective, we'll try and turn that around today, if not overnight, and we'll actually email that to all councillors anyway, and we won't file till Friday. The rest of the amendments are just a tidy up, because it sounds terrible, but because we were trying to push out the attachments to you as soon as they became available, and as they became available last week, the way Diligent works actually fixes the order of the attachments. So the rest of the red in section C is really just getting the attachment referencing right because of that process. And then we've got C7, which is the brand new one, which is to Councillor Bunting's point, to include the social media platform feedback. So we've actually limited it to during the consultation period, because it becomes how long is a piece of string and where do we stop. So we just thought it would be quite nice to define it as during the consultation period, because we could extract that data quite easily.
A question on that, it will be on the posts relevant to the Three Waters, not because sometimes people randomly pop comments on other posts.
To Three Waters, yes.
Yeah, okay.
And so they would be attached to reinforce the view, but we wouldn't go back to Nielsen and ask for additional analysis on those in the interest of time. And then of course F, which has been put forward and seems eminently sensible.
Sorry. Apologies. Carry on.
That is me.
So it's been moved by Councillor Hamilton, it's been seconded by myself, and we... Oh.
This is only a really small issue, but there were just some random typos in some of the, not in that, in the schedule of feedback for the clauses. So I assume
we thought we'd picked them all up. We'll pass through again.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Now I'm embarrassed.
Yeah, there was just a few instead of Lagoina, it was Weekner.
Yeah, thank you. There were a few. Thank you.
Okay, so you'll run a spell check over that lot then. Many words. Okay, we'll go into debate with Councillor Hamilton beginning. Thank you.
Firstly, again, just want to acknowledge some of the staff that have been involved with this process. Obviously, Andrew, Nigel, Stephen Halliwell, Mari, Jackie. This has been on top of your normal workload, so just an acknowledgement of that. The reform bus has come at speed, thick and fast, so I think it's important to just acknowledge that. In terms of elected members, I know there has been different views around the table. I think that's clear. We've all held different views of how hard we should submit, but I think one thing has been consistent and unified is that we've never agreed wholeheartedly with the proposition that's being put before us. We started this process in good faith, but if we go back to some of the issues before us, the size is the biggest one. We were never happy with the size of the entity B. We proposed many options and offerings, and we haven't really had a look in. In terms of rights, the rights of ownership, while significantly improved, still remains diluted, ambiguous and confused. Proportional representation to the asset value of what this council would propose is lost and not represented. And we're just not sure that the entity will align with our metro spatial plan, our growth, and all the housing demand that's expected of us. We just don't have that certainty. And one of the most powerful elements that's been lacking in this, of course, is the community engagement and consultation. And I want to acknowledge Jeff Taylor's position on this, because he's been consistent from the get-go that our community just hasn't had a voice. And we waited in good faith, and we now have that voice from the community. And it's clear, people just don't get it. And so today, I think we make our position really clear. The costs ongoing during this process and ongoing are not clear. Council, we don't understand our position of control. The feedback and the executive summary from the survey says there's still a lack of trust and confidence in government. There needs to be greater detail and transparency, not a one-size-fits-all approach. And the co-governance element, frankly, has been ambiguous and disparate and hasn't been a unifying, I don't think, a treaty strengthening. I think it's actually caused more division, which has been really unfortunate. But I think the biggest thing for us and for councils is we've been neutered. Effectively, we're having to broker on behalf of our community something that the community hasn't had involvement in. And again, local government hasn't been engaged in a meaningful way. So I think our position today is clear. We just can't support this. We've tried, but we can't.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Deputy Mayor Taylor. Oh, sorry, no, wait. Councillor Wilson online. Sorry.
Thank you, Mayor Paula. First of all, can I start by saying I agree totally with my good friend Councillor Ryan. There wasn't one word that I disagreed with his narrative. Let's be clear, what we are saying as a unified council is that this bill should be withdrawn. It should just be withdrawn. And we're also saying, despite us saying we need you to withdraw this bill, if you choose to ignore us, then we want to re-emphasise and re-highlight where we believe there is systemic flaws in the bill. And this is important because so far, in my opinion, this government has chosen to ignore pretty much every bit of commentary that we have provided it. And I think, to be honest, the government knew that this was going to be unpopular. The government from day one said, look, local government, we know this is going to be a hard ask, but we'll take it on because we know best. I don't think the government has actually realised how unpopular this is. And I just look at the data we've got back from our own analysis, where 73% of the population that weren't part of the representative survey, they didn't like it. And the main thrust is they didn't trust the figures, they don't trust the government, and I think they should take heed of that. And even those that responded to the representative survey, who in fact had the government's narrative, who were given an explanation of why the government feels this is important, over half didn't agree with it either. Look, I hate to quote Winston Churchill, but I'm going to, and I'm going to quote him twice. He once said, no one pretends that democracy is perfect or all wise. And he also said democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others we have tried, that have been tried. And what I'm trying to say here is the government felt they had a mandate and that they felt they knew best and that they believe that water reform, as they have articulated it, is the way to go forward. And I think the community is saying, government, you've got it wrong. We in this Hamilton City Council are saying and re-emphasising, government, you've got it wrong. But we are in a democracy. The government got the mandate. The government has decided to launch this tidal wave of reform, and it's landing. And the only thing we can keep doing is saying to the government, we think you've got this wrong, but the ultimate determiner will be at the next election. And they will have to own their strategies, their plans, and only they can own it. Now, don't for a second think that I'm saying that there was no need for some reform. There is. But for the very reasons we as a council have articulated, we believe they need to withdraw this current bill, is because they've got it wrong. And they've been so arrogant, they feel they don't need to listen. So I fully support the motion in front of me today, because it says we think you need to withdraw this bill. And we've also said very clearly why we think it's inherently flawed. So I would be astonished if this doesn't go through with 100% support. And I believe the government now has to own it. They've got a chance. They've got one more opportunity to say to the people, look, we've got this wrong and we're going to start again. But my feeling is they won't. They're arrogant. They're going to go through with it. And our only hope is that it's repealed at the change of government. Thank you.
Thanks, Ewan. Deputy Mayor Taylor.
Thank you, Mayor Southgate. Yeah, look, I support the submission today, and I acknowledge just how much work must have gone into organising all these surveys and all the submission work from staff. I can imagine there's been some late nights. I think it's a good submission, and it's based on the feedback we've got from the public. There are so many things wrong with this bill, I think it's hard to summarise them all. And the base assumption that centralisation of this kind is the best answer has never been proved to me, particularly when this model isn't even combining similar communities of interest. The geographic makeup of our entity doesn't make sense to me. The loss of local voice, local decision making, a ridiculously cumbersome governance model proposed, a lack of any clear mechanism to deal with massively differing situations and differing needs of councils. And then there's the bureaucracy that worries me. We've had the recent incidences of Te Pukenga, and I think that's a potent reminder of where we could be heading with this, into a morass of bureaucracy. Councils, what upsets me further is councils are being asked to make decisions in the face of appallingly ragged transition process and funding issues. All of that's still coming, and it feels to me like it's being cobbled together as we speak. I can just about hear them still putting it together right now. This haste and this lack of attention to detail, things being thrown together at speed, it's just a recipe for a train wreck. I'm still hopeful that the Select Committee and ultimately Cabinet may be hit by a rare moment of clarity and realise that it's time to turn around the Titanic before it hits the iceberg. But the problem, of course, for us is the submission, just like all of our residents, is late. It's being made so late in the process, it's very hard not to believe it's a fait accompli, particularly given the way the government has conducted the process to date. I would suggest in this particular issue, there's very little goodwill or trust left. But I'm appealing to the government to listen. I think they are better than this particular process. So I still have a little bit of faith there. I acknowledge the differences we've had on this particular issue, and I acknowledge that I've been bullish at times. I'm still frustrated that the bill that we're making a submission on today is about the structure of the four entities, and that structure has been with us since August last year. And that is when I think we should have consulted our residents, and I think formed a stronger position of advocacy a more united, stronger local government stance. Who knows what impact that may have had if we had attacked the entity right from the start. And because we didn't as a council, my feeling was that we sort of treaded water. I look at page 9, which is our letter to the Minister Mahuta on October 2021, and it reminds me of that. The second paragraph says the council does not support in its entirety the Three Waters model currently proposed by the government. And the letter ends by saying we're looking forward to the development of refined and amended proposals. That's not saying chuck out the four-entity model and start again, which is essentially what we're saying now. So, without beating on it, but I do think there was a flaw in this council's approach right from the beginning, that the attempt to negotiate on details instead of actually saying the structure's wrong. And I think that has cost us a bit. We've reached the end of the journey, and I feel like we've finally taken the position we should have taken a year ago. I do support this submission, but I do it with huge misgivings about the process this council has followed over the year. But I also want to put that behind us and, as one, get in behind this submission as a council, and hope for the best that we get some results. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mayor Paula. There's not a lot from the previous speakers that I disagree with. I think that even the stuff that is critical of some of the positions that I've been in favour of in the past is fair comment. I think there were tactical differences about how we should have handled things in the past, which I think the truth is that neither approach proposed by sections of our council a couple of years ago has worked that well, whether you're looking at what we did or what other councils in there, the group that was formed did. Neither of them have got any sort of traction, unfortunately. What I would say, putting my cynical hat on, here it's on there now, is don't hold your breath about the select committee changing anything of substance. Don't hold your breath also about or hang out for a change in government and have them changing anything. I'm reminded in this whole debate of the debates that took place when they were setting up, when the National Act government was setting up the Auckland Super City, and it was basically pushed through in pretty much the same way, despite major region-wide objections up there, and any sort of tinkering around the edge that was suggested was only followed insofar as it didn't change the substance of what the government of that day wanted to do. We had the opposition at the time, the Labour Party, rail against it, but of course do nothing to change it when they got in. So central governments have a habit of doing that, no matter what colour they are, and I suspect you're facing the same thing here. So I do agree with staff's proposition that we say the whole bill should be withdrawn, but also here are the reasons why and the things we think are still wrong. Haven't tried at every stage to put forward the alternatives. I think the government's had far too much reliance on officials for advice and not on local communities. Those officials, centralised in government bureaucracies, basically wouldn't recognise localism or local needs if it bit them on the backside. And that's always been a problem with all governments in recent years in New Zealand and probably in all countries, to be honest. I think that it's good that we continue to acknowledge that change is required, but I think we should focus on, from now on, really in trying to retain, and I think Sean put this earlier in the meeting, retain the good quality water services in the face of the transition we know is going to be imposed on us and imposed on the Hamilton community. We're going to have problems with highly technically proficient staff being headhunted by this new organisation and by other organisations. We're going to struggle to maintain the current services that we do provide very well in Hamilton over the next few years. And I think that's going to be our biggest task, is while all the upheaval's going on and while the government's doing what governments do, we're still going to need to provide water, wastewater and stormwater to Hamilton residents and to provide for future growth. And that's where my big worry comes from, is will this new entity, will this new structure recognise the support for growth that it needs to be in position to provide? I'm not confident that it will without a lot of screaming and yelling from us. We'll have to be an incredibly squeaky wheel on that front. And I'm not confident that even then we'll get all we need. And the things like more housing that are clearly required, more land for industry, that's going to be severely compromised by the changes that are going to be imposed on us. So I'd like us to start focusing in that area. But thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson. Councillor Pasco, I think, is next, then Councillor Van Oosten.
Thanks, Mayor Paula. And look, I'd like to start off by thanking the staff, and I know some have been already identified, Andrew, Stephen, Julie and the team, for the work that they put in, particularly under time pressure. But I'd also like to thank the 550 submitters in the general survey and reading those submissions. There's a lot of work and detail. It hasn't been the standard textbook submission that all of them have been the same, although there were a number of the questions that were answered the same way. And the 709 in the representation, because I think they have largely confirmed concerns that this council has had right from the start. And that short time frame, of course, has put everyone under pressure. It really concerns me, Mayor Paula, that 4 years ago in 2018 at the Christchurch LGNZ conference, that the Minister Mahuta indicated her preference for the Scottish water model. She had just returned from the UK. And, 4 years later, what have we got? We've got a draft bill and reportedly about $500 million of taxpayer money that's been spent thus far in getting to where we are. So while it talks about, and I know we're not debating cost efficiencies, goodness gracious me, I just wonder where these cost efficiencies are going to come. Does our submission go far enough? Look, I don't think it does, but I've listened this morning to Andrew and the work that he and his team have put in to looking at all of the variables and what should go into the submission. I think I would prefer a bit more detail about saying, well, we want you to withdraw the bill, and if you withdraw it, here are the options for a workable solution to water reform, which I think across country most of us accept that some work needs to be done in this area. But look, I don't think it'll go that far. I think the bureaucrats in Wellington have already taken control on this, and I think the Minister is nodding her head to say, this is the direction I want it to go, so I'm not going to rock the boat either with my Cabinet colleagues or myself, nor am I going to rock the boat with the bureaucrats who I've suitably recruited and installed in a Wellington high-rise. One of the areas of concern, though, for me is the miserable record that this current government has on the delivery of centralised reforms. And look, there's been a lot, and there's a lot more to come. And the record, if you look at Kiwi Build, if you look at what's happening with the Polytechs, not a good look over the last week. There have been recent aspects of the pandemic which have not been managed particularly well. And when we had the DHB, or what was then the remnants of the DHB, and to talk with us a few weeks ago, there were lots of unanswered questions that we put to them as to what was going to happen a few days from that meeting when the new health regime kicked in. And, you know, we can add to that a list of questions that go back to November of last year that we have asked the DIA, that we have asked the Minister, that remain unanswered. So, look, I think this is too big for this government. This project is far too big, and I think that we are looking down the barrel of an outcome that, I don't want to say this, but I think a number will say, we told you so, after they've had a go at implementing it. I think that Councillor Dave is right. There's not enough localism in this. We've not been able to get alongside our local MPs because I think they've been gagged and not prepared to talk to us about Three Waters. We've got the select committee members, but I think that we will probably find very, very little in the way of outcomes that we might achieve by caucusing with them. Look, I'd like to say that I don't think we have any choice today but to accept that we submit this. If we don't submit anything, then we won't be at all involved. But I'm also concerned that every step we take means that we can't turn around and go back because we've already made the step and we can only move forward, and that worries me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pasco. Councillor Van Oosten.
Here we are. How's that? Thank you. Look, the decision to say no today to the Water Services Entities Bill is consistent with our previous feedback to government. We've entered into the process as a genuine partner, and our staff have done a great job of being able to put together well-reasoned arguments for changes that we've suggested, and with the aim to influence the final outcome. And the same issues that we raised throughout the reform process have been echoed by our community in the recent feedback surveys. We said we were going to go out to them, and as we promised, we did, once we knew what the final draft bill was to be, and that more than 1,200 residents have had their say, and thank you to them for the effort that they've taken to their participation. We've tried at every opportunity to mould the bill into something our community could clearly benefit from, something that would meet their future needs and look after the environment. And our submission expresses the frustrations of our community and our council well. From the outset of the Three Waters reform, and in fact, from years prior to it being presented, our council knew that the status quo could not deliver on the needs of our growing city and region. And that's been expressed right across the country. So nor could it deliver on the additional expectation of the increased housing density that we're facing, or the higher standards for environmental protection. We have unfunded water infrastructure needs that we cannot pay for. We need bigger pipes, newer pipes, a new treatment plant in the south of the city, and more. And we can't afford to pay for it. Not today, and especially not in future decades when the pressures and the costs will compound. We don't have spectacular geysers sprouting up in the streets like Wellington City did, and we're not one of the 127 supplies that have notified an issue, or the 27 boil water notices reported in Te Mata Arawai's report this week. But it's worse than that, actually. Many of our failures are unseen. We've got pipes slowly leaking under the ground or into our fragile gully systems, or houses unable to be built for our families. So if it's not this model, what else is there? We've suggested a council-controlled organisation model, but the Finance Minister and the Local Government Minister tell us those don't achieve the balance sheet separation needed to free up debt headroom for other placemaking projects that council might have. Opposition politicians suggest contracting water services, but just what could that mean for the cost of providing water? Change is coming, so no matter who is in government, we have to be in the very best position, not to just say no, but to keep talking. And so I don't see this as the end of a process at all. It's very much my position that we stay talking and working with the decision makers to get the very best for our residents and to ensure that we've got a healthy Hamilton. Kia ora.
Thank you, Maxine. Councillor Thompson and then Councillor O'Leary. Sorry, it's just because it's really hard to manage, but do you want to go first, Councillor O'Leary?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to echo many of the points that have already been made and thank the staff for the submission. Despite my concerns at the agenda being over 4,000 pages long, I did find the feedback very valuable and very helpful. And I remember while there was concern around the council table when we were discussing consulting with our public, that they wouldn't be informed when we went out to consult. I think it's actually very evident from the feedback and the comments that they very much are informed in spite of the total lack of informative information, I guess, from our government. Agree we are limited by this submission to the entity's proposal only, but at least we are now reflecting our public's views. We're saying we don't want this, this is not a good idea, and the public is saying the same. But I also agree with Councillor Dave when he said let's not hold our breath, that the Select Committee will be able to do or willing to do anything other than tick a box that they've accepted our submission. And, you know, let's be honest, this is a done deal. Masses of staff have now been employed, legislation has been delivered, and there's pretty much no way to stop this now. The thing that has frustrated me the most through all of this is the backbone of this current reform, and actually the program of current reforms, it seems to be shaping up, is that they're based on centralising services. And there's nothing, I feel there's nothing more anti-local than centralisation. It didn't work for our police service. We lost our community constables. It's looking pretty bleak for centralising Te Pūkenga. And a centralisation assumes that all problems are equally held by all and that all solutions will be right for all. And that's just not the case. Councillor Maxine made some good points, but I disagree fundamentally on one of her last ones. Yes, we have unfunded water infrastructure programs, and yet we have in Hamilton world-class staff and actually have invested massively and have always done that in our core infrastructure. Our city is simply outgrowing us. But what that does is highlights the actual real issue that I think government should have been involved in right from the beginning. That wasn't to centralise services, it should have been to standardise services. They could have done that through through legislation, which would have pulled those councils, smaller councils that don't have population, to be able to put in world-class infrastructure up. They should have also then followed that through with co-funding, and then they should have gotten out of our local business, not do a wholesale takeover that is certain to fail. And failing on a life-sustaining service like water is something that I know the councillors around the table now and after the elections are not going to be satisfied. And believe you me, when it fails, the residents will come to us. They won't be looking to a bureaucratic, difficult to get hold of government department. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Leary. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you.
I also want to start by thanking our staff for the work that they've put into the submission to collating all of the feedback from the community on this. And I support this submission going to the Select Committee. I think it's important that we start by recognising change is needed, and I think all of us around this table do recognise that we need better access to funding in particular here in Hamilton. The funding gap that we're facing in this city is extremely concerning. We are having to limit the land available to build houses because we don't have the infrastructure to support building more. We're treading water and we are failing to respond to the housing crisis, and we do need some change. But this is not the only model that could have solved these issues. And I think the 4-entity models presents many risks and very tangible risks, including a lack of representation for Hamilton City. While there is the potential for these new entities to help to solve some of these funding gaps, I find it hard to have full confidence that they will deliver on the growth and the housing needs that we're facing. We've tried to engage in good faith. We've submitted at every opportunity. And along with others, we've put forward alternatives that could work, including regional and sub-regional CCOs. I think it's been disappointing and quite discouraging that the government has been unwilling to shift in any real way from its initial position. If they had been more willing to work with local government, I think we could have found something that a lot more councils and members of the community could have lived with. But it's also frustrating that the main opposition party has also been unable to put forward any credible alternative, and I think that could have helped a good debate around this. But there's one sentence on their website currently which states what their alternative to this would be. There's no suggestion of how they'll solve these funding issues. So in an ideal world, I would love to see some cross-party work on this. Infrastructure is only going to become a bigger and bigger issue for our country, and we need to have a much more bipartisan approach. But that's an ideal world, I guess. I think Dave is right, Councillor Dave, that we have to make sure, if this is all going ahead, that we focus hard on the transition, because this is going to put our organisation under a lot of pressure. And we also need to ensure, as best as we can, that Hamilton's needs aren't overlooked as we go forward. As I said before, we face huge challenges with housing people within the city, and it's critical that this is done right. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Nigel Rofe.
Thank you. Listening to the debate, especially to Deputy Mayors referring to the Titanic, and I had a little chuckle inside, and I thought, I've watched that movie countless times, and you always start the movie hoping that the Titanic's not going to sink at the end. And lots of times I watched that movie, I'd only watch the first half until it hit the iceberg, and then I'd switch it off because I know what's going to happen, and I don't want to see, Rose not let Jack on the door, because we all know that there was enough space for two. And then I thought, this internal thought about, if this was the Three Waters, who's going to be on the door and who's going to be sinking? And are they going to let the other person on the door? Probably not. As far as I can see, this is the Titanic heading for the iceberg, and there's no turning around anytime soon. So I have very little hope in this reform being a successful one. I look at Te Pukenga, like many of you talked about, and the challenges they're facing. I look at, as a pharmacist, I look at our health reforms and what we're facing there. We've been told that in terms of the health reform, that the idea of localities and hearing from local communities won't actually happen till the end of 2024. So, what happens till then? And we only got told that afterwards, after the reform was implemented. And so I have, very little hope, very little confidence in what's actually going to happen next, afterwards. I see a government that's spending billions of dollars on creating all of this additional bureaucracy in every sector, and then I think about those billions of dollars, if it were rerouted to actual grassroots delivery and improvements, what that would actually mean for everybody. I look at our nursing shortages and our health crisis, and water infrastructure. There's a lot of alignment in terms of where the funding could be actually put to better use. There's a total loss of local voice. Nobody's listening to us. Very, very little confidence. The opposition, like Sarah said, from what I've heard, their plan would be to listen to local government for ideas. So maybe that would be an open conversation, I don't know. But right now, gosh, withdraw the bill, put a stop to this, and go back to the drawing board. Because that Titanic's definitely sinking.
Thank you. And I have to say, you get the award for the metaphor of the day. Anybody else like to speak? Martin, I've given you the full 5 minutes. Are you going to use it? And then...
Hopefully not. And thank you for your kind invitation for me to speak. I wasn't otherwise going to speak. Seriously, this council has around the table a range of worldviews, a range of political philosophies, which is roughly reflective of our community at large. And on this issue, I've been quite heartened with the very considered debate and discussion. And it's a shame, in a sense, that the Finance and Expenditure Committee members couldn't get a clip of this Zoom conversation, on Zoom, in terms of just listening, the ability to listen, because obviously there's been a significant cross-section of considered views and obviously very considered concern. What is the reality, of course, is that we are the fourth largest metro. We are a very high growth metro and a high growth region, and irrespective of the model of Three Waters, we have huge capital investment and costs ahead of us. So obviously the status quo per se is not an option, but what we have clearly said is that the model that has been proposed in this legislation is not going to meet our needs for a very significant number of reasons. I am still hopeful that the Parliament will listen very, very closely to these submissions and, as has been alluded to, go back to the drawing board. But very clearly, irrespective of who forms the government at the end of 2023, significant reform in Three Waters is still going to happen. And notwithstanding a one-line sentence apparently on one of the political parties' website, the reality is any government of the day in a country of 5 million with diverse topography, a country the size of Japan, is going to still have to undertake significant reforms in the way in which we do our Three Waters to future-proof this economy and society moving ahead, particularly in terms of climate change, all those resilience issues. However, in terms of democratic accountability, in terms of ownership, I don't believe that the current four-entity model is the right one for the City of Hamilton. In that sense, obviously I join with all of my colleagues in that view. In summary, however, I've actually been quite heartened by this discussion today, which I think has been well considered. Each individual member, I've found their contribution incredibly useful. Such a shame that individual members of the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee couldn't get a recording of this particular debate and to listen to it very closely, and obviously wish our Mayor and Chair of Infrastructure well in making the submission to the Parliament. I am hopeful that the Parliament will listen to us, but irrespective, significant change is on the way, ultimately irrespective of who is the government in Wellington. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Anyone else? Otherwise, I'll say a few things. Public submissions give a very clear and direct message to government, as we are today. Council has always said the four-entity model is not right for us here in Hamilton. I do agree with Ewan that some change across New Zealand at a New Zealand scale is required, and I've made that case before. But we all remain in total opposition to the four-entity model. And actually, I agree with some of the comments I think Deputy Mayor Taylor made around the geography, including Taranaki and the like, didn't seem to make sense to me. We tried as hard as we could to create change, but at the end of the day, and that was the right thing to do, to influence change, to work with government and others to try and make change. But the changes were disappointingly minimal in the end. But no other council nor coalition of councils has got cut through or been any more successful. As soon as we got the details of the bill, which is recently, and don't forget, I will remind people that this has been government's timeline and government's process that we've had to respond to. As soon as we got details of the bill, so we knew exactly what was being proposed, we did consult with our public, and I do want to thank the independent research professionals, Nielsen, and our staff for the good work that they've done in a compressed amount of time to get the feedback from the general public. And I want to thank the general public for taking the time to submit. We are sending, this is a critical point for me, we are sending all the public feedback untouched and unsanitised, and this is absolutely the right thing to do. I've also personally encouraged the public to submit directly to the Select Committee, as is their right, and I know some will. I will, as I have continued throughout the process, to sheet home the public views and the democratic views of this council. I actually found appealing the conversation that Councillor O'Leary raised here about standardising rather than centralising. I thought that was an excellent point, well made. I've pushed for strong growth, a strong growth city, a strong metro city voice, and anybody who's been around me in any of these hundreds and hundreds of hours of Zoom meetings and advisory groups that I've taken part on in the last year and a half will have heard me time and time talk about the difference of our council from other councils. We're a fast growth council. We face huge infrastructure burdens going forward, and I've made that so very clear that our voice must be strong and must relate to the issues facing growth councils, not smaller councils whose issues are quite different. And I just want to finish with the point today that whether the government listens to us or not, there's a burden of infrastructure coming our way, and a large proportion of that is water. We've got to supply water services to create infill. We've got to supply water services to enable new subdivision, as Sarah quite rightly said. And this is the point I want to make to government as alongside this no to the four entities is whatever they decide, whatever the future we face is, we will need support with infrastructure funding. It's that simple. It's millions of dollars, and we can't go it alone. And I've made that point very, very clear in every contact that I've had with cabinet ministers or others. So we just have to look down the road and realise there is something to be solved here, but this is not the way to solve it. So I'm completely united with council on this matter. Thanks. Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Ms. Moore, and I agree with you. There is a burden of infrastructure on the way, but you know, this ain't the way to solve it. Te Pukenga out of cash, Wakakutahi out of cash, Kaiangaora starting to make noises that they're out of cash. We ain't going to find it there. This is a terribly bad deal for Hamilton. Look, if there's one way to stop a bully in their tracks is to smack them on the nose early in the piece. We didn't. We said we'll stay on the 10 with the bully. This is a bad deal for Hamilton. It's a bad deal for Hamilton. And we are letting our community down if we don't say no. I think personally, and I've held this view all along, we should have said no earlier to the four entity model. It's been death by 1,000 cuts. It's been the boiling frog. It's been the emperor's got new clothes, all in one. And as Ewan said, Winston Churchill was right. Democracy is the worst system except for all the others. And what we've seen through this whole process is the cracks in democracy. This is what happens when an absolute majority government cracks along in an MMP environment. That's what happens. That's why MMP started up in the first place. I remember 5 years ago, as a reasonably new councillor, there was a fantastic joint waters model put up by Waikato, Waipa and HCC, and after $1 million was spent on that, it was scuttled by 2 votes in one of our neighbouring councils. Waikato went north to water care, we went nowhere, and I could hear the bulldozer starting up right then in Wellington, and here it is, it's at our doorstep. And I often wonder, as many people do, what the situation would have been had that model succeeded. It might have worked. In fact, I believe it would have worked. But it didn't start. And here comes the bulldozer. We needed to reject this outright, and I'm pleased I'll be supporting this submission because it does. And we need to do it now. In fact, we needed to do it ages ago. I think, and this is my opinion, I think we've been on the back foot with our position ever since the One Network News Bulletin, 14th of July 2021, when our mayor was waving a hand in support of the four entities model.
Point of order, Mark Bunting.
I can produce the video.
I have never spoken in support of the Three Waters.
I'm going to challenge you on that because when the reporter said who supports the 3 entities model, your hand was up there waving. So, I mean, how can you dispute that?
No, I haven't seen that.
Oh, it's the 14th of July 2021.
Excuse me. I've always said that the model is flawed, but I do support, and I've been honest with this, some level of reform. The 4 entities has never been as... No.
I'll happily circulate the report if you want, and people can make their own decision. So 14th of July 2021. Okay, so from that point, I think we were on the back foot. There were times I heard the community screaming at us, and it was like a different world to what was going on in this building. The community was saying this is a huge pile of horse manure, and we seem to be rifling through the horse manure looking for our new pony. To do anything otherwise would be to reinforce the growing cry in our community that we are working for the government, not against the government. We haven't been included in the working group. We didn't have a voice. We're not represented on the select committee. We don't have a voice. We've got lovely but lowly ranked local MPs who are working hard. But we haven't got a voice. And I think if Hamilton had made a stronger voice early in earlier in the piece, like we tried to, we would have smacked the bully on the nose and they would have taken notice. That's my opinion. But hey, look, you know, it's been and gone. This is a strong position. I'm very supportive of it. And if you want me to circulate that, I'm happy to circulate that video.
Thank you. Right of reply. Oh, Mark Donovan, want to add anything?
I wasn't going to, but I feel a little bit inspired by Bunty's speech, and certainly references to Titanic and all that sort of thing. I'll stay probably true to one of my original comments where I think that this is going to be still fought out by lawyers in court of law, and we're going to all end up funding it, whether we pay as a ratepayer or a taxpayer. So, yeah, I don't have much more to add. I just am very supportive that we have unified in our approach to the submission. So I really, and I rate all the work that the staff have done. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Councillor Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Paula. Look, some good debate all round. I think ultimately now, whilst some will disagree with the view we've taken, I think at the end of the day, to Kesh's point, you know, we're all in the Titanic, so I think it's a little bit moot having cracks now. I think at the end of the day, you've had a tough role to navigate, Mayor Paula, with, you know, what has been the biggest hospital past local government has probably seen in a decade. So I don't think it's an easy position, but respect that you and potentially Chair Angela will take this to government and make our case with no equivocity, if that's a word. I just made it up. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we, you know, our support is behind you, and it's pleasing that potentially today we'll arrive at this point, coming full circle and in full agreement. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll go to the vote. All those in favour, raise your hand, please. That's opposed. Dave, where are you at? Is that opposed or for? For.
The motion is carried unanimously.
There you go. Everyone, you've got half a day. Free-ish, right? Thank you. Thank you for the robust debate.
Thanks all.